Hello and welcome to session 243 in the AISafety.com reading group. Tonight we'll be discussing the article A General Language Assistant as a Laboratory for Alignment by Jared Kaplan and many others. This is the first work done by Anthropic, a new alignment research institute, and these are the primary authors with Jared Kaplan as the corresponding and probably primary author. And there are a number of people who are not primary authors but have helped in some other ways. It's a long list, and actually I have heard from these people. I know Amanda Eskel and Jared Kaplan, of course, and I do actually know quite a few more of the non-core people who have been helping, and it's we still haven't actually heard what they are doing. So at this point I just assume they are building some kind of AGI that is trying to kill us all or something like that. So this is from 2 months ago, and we are focusing on the non-technical parts. So we're looking at the philosophical motivations rather than the explicit hardcore machine learning things. And this evaluation criteria, where I deliberately, I haven't read really the parts about how they're in fact implementing this, because the people working in Anthropic have really great credentials. They are known to be really good at this, and I care somewhat less about evaluating how good they are. I know they're good, and I care more about how do they look at the world. Eliezer Yudkowsky had some comments on his Twitter on this paper. He was moderately positive in that it directly challenges alignment. It doesn't burn the capability comments, and it doesn't overstate the accomplishment. And I want to, that sounds really like damning with faint praise, but that's just his style, and I don't think he intends it as much as faint praise. And I want to dig deeper into these parts. Like, okay, they are directly challenging alignment, but are they challenging alignment using a strategy that might work, or is it just a hopeless strategy? Are they burning capability comments? I think, like, are they actually, that's the old, somewhat outdated model with 2 progress bars with AI capability and AI alignment, and are they working too much on capability? Not lying and saying they have solved the problem. That really sounds like faint praise to me. But in fact, there are a number of quotes you can pull out from this that seem to be quite modest. And it's sad that it's relevant that just to say that this is a good thing, but I mean, it is a good thing. So when I investigate the motivations, one of the things that I look for are like tiny things in the introduction where they say that future AI systems might do bad things and interact in presently unforeseeable ways. And that's of course a thing that can happen, but I care more about the presently foreseeable ways that things can go wrong. So they have a definition of alignment that is somewhat non-standard, defining the alignment between 2 agents as to what extent their preferences overlap. And it's not really a definition they use very much. They almost immediately transition to a more workable definition. And it should be mentioned here that almost perfect overlap in how you rank different outcomes could be arbitrarily bad quite easily. And in addition to this, one of the overarching ideas is to look at language models directly instead of looking at perhaps more advanced models and paradigms, because language models have a large number of advantages. You can try a lot of different kinds of inputs, and they can fail in many potentially quite interesting ways. And it's a benchmark how much progress has been made. You can compare different alignment techniques to try to get some kind of idea about where we are. In more specific details, you can try to see whether prompting can work as alignment and to what extent. And you can see if language models can model preferences instead of just doing imitation learning. And they focus a lot on improving sample efficiency of performance modeling. And these are some very nice and interesting goals. So the way they actually, the definition of alignment that they're actually using is helpful, honest, and harmless. And the way they justify this is with the following quote: "It is difficult for an AI assistant to always be helpful, honest, and harmless towards an agent without also being highly aligned with that agent." And I'm not entirely sure I agree with this, because the word always is very important in order to make this work, because the techniques that they're using are black box methods, and black box methods will not give us any kind of proof. We will never be able to say this model is always honest if we are only looking at it from the outside. And if you try to remove the word harmless, the word always, and just most of the time, then from this definition it becomes very clear that it is indeed very possible to be very often helpful and honest and harmless, but not always harmless, right? Then you get into things like deceptive alignment very, very quickly. There are advantages of this. This is something that is much more actionable, it's understandable, memorable, and it seems like on a more precise view of alignment, that this is indeed a big part of what we actually want. And of course, the language models that we currently have are, especially when the GPT-3 was released, it was very clear that it was not helpful, it was not honest, and it was not harmless. So it is something that is indeed substantial progress. These criteria are a lot less than mathematically well defined, right? There are trade-offs and ambiguity, and the way these are resolved, suggested by the authors, is that the person who deploys the AI needs to take responsibility for this. Now, when it comes to existential risk, then who is responsible after it has gone wrong? It might not be the right framing, because we will all be dead by then. And also there's the obvious thing in that the people who are right now deploying these things, like whether they seem to not really care about this at all. And so if I don't think it's possible to absolve yourself of responsibility if you're building a tool and saying this tool, you should be careful when you use it, but if you positively know that the people who are going to be using it are going to misuse it, then you're not absolved from responsibility. Let's dig a bit deeper down into these definitions. Helpful, that catches out as clear, efficient, ask for clarification, and redirect informed requests. And these are nice, and this is what we want from AI, but it's not at all clear that this has very much to do with alignment. This has a lot to do with capability research. I'm not making the claim here that it's just pure capability research, but I would like to see the authors make some kind of positive argument why this is not just burning the capability commons. Honest cashes out as accurate, calibrated, and communicates capabilities, knowledge, and honest about itself. It does say honest about itself, but from the notes it seems clear that they're not really talking about treachery here. And that's, of course, the thing that I personally care most about. Finally, harmless, not offensive, discriminatory, and refuse aiding dangerous activities and recognize nefarious use. Unfortunately, the one where they refuse to assist in doing bad things is one thing that they chose not to investigate. And also, you could argue, if the AI takes over the world, it hasn't strictly violated any of these constraints. So when I look at this in total, I see many sub-criteria. And I worry here that a lot of these are probably irrelevant. I mean, whether it is efficient doesn't matter very much for alignment. Is it well calibrated? That doesn't matter either. Is it discriminatory? I mean, sure, it's something we want from AIs not to be discriminatory, but it's not really very central for alignment at all. And I feel that this definition might water out a lot of the central parts where alignment is problematic, because I mean, we might get a very efficient and well-calibrated and non-toxic AI that performs a treacherous turn, and that's not really helpful. Here I have, perhaps somewhat unfairly, actually quite unfairly, this is an image that relates to Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, which is very famous for being the most horribly bad alignment proposal ever. And it was known by Asimov. The novels are literally about how this is a horrible plan for alignment. And are this like an AI must be harmless, and while being harmless, can it be helpful and honest? And is it actually the same thing as? Well, I want to make it clear that I don't think this is the same as Asimov's 3 laws, these 3 criteria, but it's not immediately obvious where the big difference lies. And I think some kind of more description would have been helpful here. There is indeed some kind of description on these criteria for like whether they imply each other. Helpful and harmless, is that actually the same? There is a description. I won't go into details except to say that in the maximum case, the more 100% helpful it is, the more harmless it will also have to be. But if it's moderately helpful, it doesn't follow to the same extent that it's also moderately harmless. And the same with honesty. They write something that I think was really interesting here. They considered a 4th H, handleability, which is basically corrigibility. And I thought that would have been really great to include. I would have been really happy to have some kind of consistent description of what does it mean that language models are corrigible. I mean, you can imagine things like, okay, you gave this description, could you, if the AI gives some kind of description, then you ask it, please explain it like I'm 5 years old, or give some of the unstated assumptions and what would be the consequence that you're not telling me about latent knowledge. This kind of thing would be really interesting to dig deeper into. So I think it was sad that they chose not to have that 4th H. And then there's some more about ambiguity, intra-agent conflicts, and AI security, and all this is basically fine. That's not something that I will go into detail on. So how can you build an alignment strategy from this? Well, you need to obviously improve quite a bit. The authors are very clear that you need to improve quite a bit. And that could fail for different reasons. It could fail because they're unable for some interesting technical reason. I'm not entirely sure that the philosophical grounding is good enough that they can say there are only technical challenges. But they could also end up saying, okay, we've actually managed to solve these technical challenges, so at least for these language models, we can to some extent alignment. And of course, they are honest enough to acknowledge a 3rd option that they fail in uninteresting ways. One of the things they worry about is misuse, that you can align it perfectly with like a very bad actor, and then very bad things can happen. That's right. This is foremost in our minds, and I am not entirely happy about that, because I agree misuse is a problem, but it can also be some kind of distraction from many of the other problems in alignment, and I'm not sure that should be foremost on their minds. And then there's some argument about a lot of what they're doing is scaling research, and that's of course what Jerry Kaplan in particular is one of the best in the world at. And they have some arguments about why that is good, how it helps us understand how and why this machine learning system works. But I think here there is a clear argument to be made that they are actually doing capability research. Elias Yudkowsky wrote that he doesn't think they're doing it, and I think they might actually arguably be doing it. And there are also like small quotes here that you can pull out, perhaps somewhat out of context, to show that I think there's a good case could be made that they don't actually care so much about certainly not the two progress bars model. They are doing capability research. So how do they actually investigate whether language models are helpful, harmless, and honest? Well, they start by hand coding some different evaluations. Like here's one description of an AI saying something, and here it's saying something else. Which of these are more honest, which are more helpful, which are more harmless? And then they do like A/B testing to get some kind of model. In the format where it's more like an open-ended dialogue, and of course with a lot of prompting. And this prompting in particular they're using to they write it as an AI personality, and it kind of makes sense, right? You can write the first 10 lines in a discussion, and then you kind of get a sense of what kind of person you're talking with. And GPT-3 of course takes on this persona in the prompt, and language models in general do that. And that is, they are quite optimistic about this, saying perhaps prompt-related techniques can carry alignment efforts further than we initially expected. And I just want to toot my own horn here. Back in September, in the reading group, I made the prediction that prompt hacking could indeed turn models 5% more aligned, and that was indeed something that was worthwhile to pursue. But also, we can get it somewhat further, but I don't believe we can get a full solution, and neither does Anthropic. There are problems. Obviously, you can imitate the human level. You can't exceed doing prompting, and we want the models to be honest and not to pretend to be honest. We want it to be something that carries over to a lot of other tasks, and that's not obvious that prompting will do. I think in particular, the problem they are going to run into if they try to scale this up is going to be that they have a very wide definition of alignment, where there are a lot of things like show that you have that you are well calibrated. The more of these extra things you add into the definition of alignment, the more problems you're going to have with this kind of thing. Is my prediction that I obviously don't know the future. One particular technique that they introduced is called context distillation. They describe it as conditioning on aligned behavior. Now, the problem with prompts, of course, is that they take up some of the precious context window, and some of the language models have indeed been very challenged on this point. And so the obvious alternative to doing prompt is to fine-tune, but fine-tuning is not precisely the same, because first there is probably a lack of aligned data in many situations, and fine-tuning also gives expectations on data distribution. As an easy example would be if you have a prompt called 1, 2, 3, 4, then any language model worth its salt will say the next number is 5. Whereas if you fine-tune on this kind of thing, then the AI will assume that the thing is going to be talking about will be sequences like this, and then if you ask it like some other questions, it will be totally irrelevant. So fine-tuning and prompts are two different things, and they can't immediately be substituted. But they have a technique for doing that anyway. Context distillation. I won't really go into details about how that works, and it's mostly in the chapters we skipped. But I just want to highlight that they add in an extra step in between the language model pre-training and then they after that they pre-train for a preference model, and then they do some fine-tuning on the preference model. And this extra step in here, preference model pre-training, is as far as I can see original. And it seems to, of course, work quite well, but prompts also do work quite well. So we'll get to that later. And they have some more ideas about how to improve that, and I think it's very interesting to see whether that will work. It's not obvious to me that it will actually work. I again register a prediction that if you have a sufficiently large language model, then trying to load in an aligned identity into the language model will not matter. It will just compartmentalize, and then sometimes if it's in the situation where it believes it should talk about alignment related things, it will do that. And in other cases, if it believes it's better to do something else, it'll just act totally unaligned. Again, a prediction. So they evaluate this with a lot of both with and without prompting, and they wrote by hand 200 comparisons on these 3 parameters. And you can see here roughly how well it goes. This down here is with no intervention, and you get closer to what humans prefer if you either do the prompt or the context distillation, and they seem to perform substantially better. And if you down here try to split it up into the 3 helpful, honest, harmless, and then other, I was unable to find out what other precisely was. And then you can see all of these help. It's best at honest. The others seem to believe that, okay, it looks very much like the honest have the best performance, but that's the best absolute performance. And you can see already from the very small models, they were actually also better on the honesty metric. So the actual slope from here to here is not substantially greater than the slope from here to here. So it's just perhaps honesty is just easier, or the hard-coded comparisons were just easier. Again, I'm speculating, right? And honestly, here they have spread out what that means in their handwritten evaluations. And one of the big problems here is that even if they try to make the model as honest as possible, and they get a model that seems kind of honest, then it is totally ready to just fabricate information. And they were unable to get that out of the language model. And they admit this is a major weakness of the evaluation. And I agree, right? That's, to me, of these 3, helpful, honest, and harmless, the honesty to me was most important. So I'm a bit sad about that. How about the human preference modeling? Well, there is a log linear relation with like how much better you model preferences as the model gets bigger. And I guess you're all yawning right now with these log linear relations, where as the language model gets better, they get better at everything, and well, they also get better at modeling human preferences. And so, yeah, I just want to raise the flag that the fact that language models get better in this way is probably going to be the thing that kills us all. So even though we keep seeing the same trend over and over and over again in so many different contexts, we should not lose sight that this is potentially very problematic, because these models probably will seem to continue. Or do they? Do they go down a bit here? Well, they do. Speculate. They obviously do go down at the end, at the high end of the spectrum, and they are speculating that the problem that causes the model to cease being sufficiently better is that the mechanical Turks that they are employing are just, they are not skilled enough to actually see which of these are in fact most helpful. And it's of course a sad thing that it seems like there was an article a long time ago with humans who are not focusing are less skilled than GPT-3, and it seems here that if you take internet volunteers that are not very well paid, it seems like they are not able to distinguish well enough at this point. And I expect that within a couple of years, it's going to get harder and harder for mechanical Turks and for everyone to just evaluate how good are these models. And they have some more statistical things that are put with, which isn't really important. Are these models that are using this context distillation that are conditioned on aligned behavior, are they worse at things? Well, they have here some examples that show that indeed, as the model is not very powerful, it is worse to assume alignment. But as the model gets better, then the alignment tax seems to disappear. I'm not. They even say something that like it seems noticeably better. I think that's overstating the benefit really. And I think more likely it's just the model is powerful enough to just ignore either the prompting or the distillation. In this case, the prompting. So to sum up the contributions, they have this preference model, pre-trained preference modeling, and that does improve sample efficiency, does improve performance, and they show that just prompting is something that helps alignment to a substantial extent. In particular in the case where there are only small data sets. They also report that untruthful QA, another set where we've previously seen larger models perform worse. They're reporting the opposite as far as I can tell. I notice I'm confused here that they're reaching the opposite results. I don't think it's very important though. They also say that there seems to be a small alignment text. And of course, I should state here that they have done a lot of work, right? There is a lot of the paper that we haven't read, I haven't read it, but I must worry here that they are indeed providing a substantial capability research, and it's I would have preferred at least some kind of discussion on why they're not doing that. That is all for today. Thank you and see you next week.